Welcome to week 12 for ED 2491. The focus of this week's presentation will be how to manage the stress that comes with being a teacher and to most importantly realise the skills that you have to approach any challenging situation most effectively for both you and your students. So, resilience, as is the focus of this presentation, this is a topic that has become very popular within the social sciences as a concept that describes an individual's ability to bounce back or cope with life's challenges and stresses. Although there is controversy around this concept, as some argue that some individuals have more resilience and others have less, some even actually argue about the relevance of the actual concept and its application. So there's a lot of the differing views on the concept. However, we're going to, for this purpose of this week, is look at what teacher stress is and how teachers can develop skills to be able to handle those stresses. So let's go. Well, by the end of this week, you should be able to describe the stresses that a pre-service or novice status can produce for someone entering the teaching profession. You'll also explain why these stresses can occur. You'll define resilience and describe the factors that can increase one's resilience. You'll construct or analyse teacher responses, demonstrating resilience or a lack of resilience to potentially adverse scenarios, and construct adverse scenarios and provide illustrations of resilient responses and less resilient responses. So you're basically going to have a look at a whole variety of scenarios and think about how you would approach those same scenarios and what you think would be the most effective way to handle those situations. So, no doubt you have heard that teaching has been labelled as a very stressful profession. I know that I have certainly heard this throughout my teaching experience, particularly from teachers themselves. If you have heard this, then why do you think this is so? Do you think it is due to the workload that teachers experience, or the testing that they're increasingly experiencing, the behaviour management that they need to go through on a day-to-day basis, or their interactions with particular students that may be quite challenging, or a combination of these factors? I do have a series of images that I'll post up onto LearnJCU. I'm not putting them up in this video as it ends up creating a bit of issues with downloads, so I'm going to have to place them on LearnJCU. But anyway, they're there for you to have a think about, all the factors that do contribute to the stress of the profession. Well, Scovalt, in this week's readings, highlights what can cause stress for people who are new in high-touch professions, such as teaching. He believes that through naming and talking about these stresses, it helps provide validity, clarity, and hope for novices. So when he says novice, it means basically anyone new to a profession. And because teaching is considered to be quite stressful, he outlines the importance of teachers talking about what is actually happening in the classroom, and in that way, by talking about it, it's basically providing validity for teachers who are experiencing it, and possibly some strategies in how to handle it, basically. So, Howard and Johnson, it lists some of the factors that can cause teacher stress as being due to the following factors. So teaching students who lack motivation can be quite stressful, maintaining discipline on a day-to-day basis, the time pressures and workload that is increasing over time, coping with consistent changes throughout the education system, being evaluated by others, particularly their peers, dealing with other colleagues, maybe some difficult people, self-esteem and status issues in regards to their profession and who they see themselves as, problems dealing with administration and management, so dealing with those day-to-day administrators, their role conflict and ambiguity, so not being sure exactly what their role entails and sometimes feeling like they've got to do so many things outside of their role, and the poor working conditions. So some teachers cite lack of resources and the environment as contributing to their stress. So before we go on, we need to look at what is resilience and define the concept. It can be seen as the capacity to respond to adversity in a positive way. And this is influenced by three factors: the individual's external supports, their inner strength, and their learned skills. So in your the Week 12 Learning Guide, there are 5 definitions, and I'm briefly going to go through them now. The first one states that resilience is our capacity to bounce back from an event or experience that we would regard as bad. It also describes our capacity to approach challenging events positively. So that's one way of looking at resilience. There's another definition: resilience is our universal capacity which allows a person, group or community to prevent, minimise or overcome the damaging effects of adversity. Resilience may transform or make stronger the lives of those who are resilient. Further, resilience may be promoted not necessarily because of adversity, but indeed may be developed in anticipation of inevitable adversities. So individuals being prepared to handle whatever challenges they come across. Then in definition 3, resilience is a human capacity to face, overcome and even to be strengthened by experiences of adversity. What is the opposite of resilience? Well, the answer, as outlined in your learning guide, is learned helplessness. So if a teacher feels that they cannot cope, they have the belief that in the face of uncontrollable events, there's nothing that they can do to change their situation. This belief, if held over a long period of time, can lead to increasing passivity, depression and ill health and despair. So it can have quite devastating consequences on the individual and the people around them due to their belief system in handling a situation that they encounter. So what can a teacher do to try to feel stronger and a lot better able to handle the challenges that they face? Well, they should first consider what external supports they have. So these external supports include trusting relationships with others that help them feel safe and loved. And this can be at both the intimate and friendship level. So what type of friends they have, their relationship with their most intimate loved ones, and whether they feel that they can share what they're going through with those people and support it at the same time. And also looking at the resources in their community, including health, counselling, what religious organisation they may be a part of, or spiritual guidance that they receive, sporting and educational support, people or services. So it's multifactorial, looking at all those things around them that feels like a strong network of people that they can access in case they feel that they are handling or faced with a challenge that they can't cope with, or that they need extra support to cope with. Then there's also inner strengths. These are the inner features that define the individual's character, such as having empathy for others, faith in themselves, faith in something outside of themselves, or faith in the future, an optimism that things are going to be okay, regardless of what happens, self-confidence, self-confidence, which is confidence in the individual's own abilities, respect for themselves, respect for others, and autonomy, a feeling of control but freedom at the same time. So being able to navigate their horizon and feeling like they are free to do so without constraint. So those having external and inner strength is important, but also learning skills is essential as well to be able to deal with the challenging situations. Thankfully, we can learn these things that will enable us to, even if we feel we don't have the strength at a particular point in time, we can learn further skills to strengthen our ability to cope. So these include what is known as self-talk, that is what we say to ourselves influences how we feel rather than our feelings determining how we think. In other words, we are not basically, I think I've jumped the gun here a little bit, my apologies. We are looking at okay, I have jumped the gun. we're looking at our ability to relate with others, which is interpersonal relating, solving problems such as reading the other person's temperament, and managing our beliefs and self-talk. So which of these skills do you think you already possess, and which of these skills would you like to develop further? So something to think about when you're at this stage of your teaching career. As a pre-service teacher, you're now thinking about, well, which of these skills do I need to further develop to be able to handle any of the challenges that I may come across? Now, there are several types of learned skills that we can acquire to help us deal with challenging situations. These include what is known as self-talk, that is, what we say to ourselves influences how we feel, rather than our feelings determining how we think. So in other words, one of my favourite quotes is that we are not disturbed by what happens to us, but by our thoughts about what happens, by Epictetus, which basically essentially means that it's not necessarily the situation that's disturbing, it's how we think about that situation that's disturbing us. And if we can examine our self-talk, we have a much greater ability to be able to change our circumstances. And there's also the explanatory style. Martin Seligman, a psychologist on positive psychology, states that people can be placed along a continuum for pessimistic to optimistic thinking, and I've just provided you with a bit of an image here. But basically, an individual can place themselves along this continuum, according to Seligman, on their tendency to think either way. But I generally think that we tend to deviate along this spectrum depending on the day, year, time of life, situation, context. It can vary. I don't think anyone stays along either end for too long. So there are the three dimensions of our self-talk can be labelled as permanence, or pervasiveness, or personal. So permanence is the idea that you'll believe something is happening, the challenging situation happens sometimes versus to it always happening. If you believe that the situation only happens sometimes, you will see the situation as only isolated and not as all permanent in your life. Where if you believe it will always happen, then you see it as something that makes the way you see it'll basically be a trend that will continue happening throughout your teaching. Then there's the pervasiveness of your ideas. So whether you believe a situation that's happened in your classroom happens across the board in every classroom, that's called globalizing a challenge, or whether you believe it's just specific to your classroom at that particular point in time, but is not globalized or generalized to every other context. And it's believed that if you believe it's specific, you're much more likely to feel that you have some role to play and that it's not going to be something that continues in the future. Then there's a personal aspect of self-talk, which is if you internalize responsibility for what's happening around you, you're more likely to be involved in self-blaming yourself, where if you externalize what happens and you think, okay, what other factors are causing this, then you're likely to look at other reasons rather than blaming yourself. So yeah, these three ways of thinking have a dichotomy basically, and it's where you sit within that is on how much autonomy you have in the outcome of what you're facing. And there's the ABCD process by Martin Seligman, which he created to help individuals, such as teachers, be able to think about what events they're facing and whether they are bad or not. And so the teacher will identify an adverse situation, then three possible beliefs about the situation, then look at the consequences of each possible belief, and by seeing this, they'll be able to dispute the beliefs that aren't working for them by providing a counter argument. And lastly, they will feel a different level of energization based on which consequence they follow. And clearly each consequence will have a different effect on how you feel physically and mentally. So a really good process to apply, and I think some of you will really enjoy doing the activity for this week's tutorial or discussion board. So to summarise, there are a whole array of skills that teachers can use to help them cope with the challenges and difficulties faced when new to the teaching profession. We know that resilience can be defined in a number of ways, but it is essential to be able to cope with the challenges and difficulties that we as teachers will face. What I'd like to end on is that although teaching can be challenging, it can also be very rewarding and something that is very much worthwhile experiencing. And as you'll grow as an individual, and you'll often feel proud of yourself for being able to navigate such a terrain and come out a stronger person. So in this week's tutorial discussion board or workshop, you'll respond to one of the following questions and post that one to the discussion board or bring it to your tutorial, and post your personal journal as well. So you'll complete 5 questions. You'll do one of the 5 questions, so that is an error there. The first one is, what does Skavolt mean by the fragile and incomplete practitioner self? Use something from your own experience or that of others to illustrate. The second question is, Skavolt says that the lack of an internal cognitive map can be a stressor for many people new to teaching. Explain in your own words what Skavolt means by an internal cognitive map and how a lack of one produces stress. Use something from your own experience or that of others to illustrate what you mean. According to Skavolt, what is required in terms of effort and time to develop an internal cognitive map? Question 3. Skavolt says that the acute need for positive mentoring can be a stressor for people new to teaching. Explain in your own words what he means by this term and why it could produce stress. Use something from your own experience or that of others to illustrate what you mean. Also, question 4, Skavolt says that the intense evaluation and illuminated scrutiny of professional gatekeepers can be a stressor for people new to teaching. Explain in your own words what he means by this term and why it could produce stress. Use something from your own experience or that of others to illustrate what you mean. Lastly, what does Skavolt mean by porous emotional boundaries? How can they be a stressor for people new to teaching? Use something from your own experience or that of others to illustrate what you mean. As you can see, there's 5 very good questions there. If I was you, I would choose one that most interested in you and something that you feel you'll benefit the most from. And there's a quiz in the week 12 materials this week for you to complete as well. In your personal journal, you'll describe a situation from your life initially perceived as adverse or challenging, wherein you just demonstrated resilience or as it took place, after which you were able to process it in what you consider to be a resilient manner. You'll use Seligman's ABCD framework to analyse the nature of your initial self-talk, beliefs in regards to this situation. Were your initial beliefs characterised by permanence and pervasiveness, or of a personal nature? You'll map the consequences if you are able to maintain these initial beliefs. You'll discuss how you disputed these beliefs by looking at the evidence, generating alternative ways of viewing and or decatastrophizing in light of the most likely outcome, and in turn how this shift in perspective and a plan for action impacted your overall sense of well-being. There are a number of examples provided in this week's learning module that apply to this framework. So, to conclude this activity, by discussing the effectiveness of Seligman's framework as a tool to build teacher resilience and whether you intend to use it in your personal or professional life. So, if you have any further questions or suggestions, please see the learning guide, the subject outline, Learn JCU and Facebook for further contact details and information about this subject, or you can contact me directly. So, next week I will present a final video for the subject Teaching for Learning called Professional Ethics and Reflection. Thank you for listening to this week's Teacher Stress and Resilience. Please subscribe and comment as any feedback is appreciated. Thank you. Bye for now.